Bolano Home. I'm here with George Pedro of RMS, and he's here to talk to some of you that are going to buy your first home and considering, do I want to become a landlord or do I want a single family? There's a lot of benefits in actually owning a multifamily first versus a single family, but maybe it's not for you, maybe it is. But this segment right here is actually to inform you of what you need to know prior to actually making that final decision of going with the multifamily. So George, when some people actually come up to you and they say, hey, I want to own a multifamily, but I'm still kind of on the fence about a single family, what are some of the first things that you tell them about owning a multifamily first?
Great. So I do get that question a lot, and I think the biggest thing is if you know you want to be a landlord, if you know that down the road you want to own multifamily property, I always advise them to buy the multi first.
So why is that?
Because when you buy the multi first, you can do a low down payment. You're a first time buyer, you can do a small 3.5% down payment, you can get a gift possibly for down payment, maybe you get a grant. So you can buy that multi with a low down payment. Down the road, you can buy the single family, again with a low down payment because now you already own a multi. But if you buy the single family first,
right.
Now you go to buy a multi, it's investment property. So once it's investment property, it's 25% down, and you may never own a multifamily at that point because the down payment is so big, you're gonna have trouble doing it.
Right, and so you're looking at, I think you said 25% before?
Yes.
Right, and so actually, we were just talking about this, about how I made that mistake. My first house, I bought a single family, and then I wanted to go to a multifamily, and there ended up being a problem with that because most multifamilies, let's say on a regular, there's a $200,000 multifamily, that down payment for me at 25% is just way too big, and I wasn't able to do it, so I regretted it. So this is actually, I hope, really useful to most of you. So George, so we're through the down payment part. What are some of the other things that the buyer should be aware of when purchasing that multifamily?
So you've decided on a multi. Now what we worry about is the down payment. Mm-hmm. So it's different than a single family because you will need a down payment. Single families, there are some programs with no money down. Multis, you need a down payment, 3.5% down, again, through gift, through grant, through your own savings. You're going to need that. You're going to need closing costs. Closing costs, a lot of times Jonathan will have the seller kick in money built into the deal so that the seller helps you with the majority of closing costs. Another thing that we're going to worry about is reserves. Different than ones and twos. When you buy a 3 or a 4 unit, you need 3 months reserves. So if that mortgage payment is $2,000 a month, you need an extra $6,000 of your own savings. That money cannot be a gift or grant. It can be your own savings, which includes retirement savings. So there's ways to show reserves, but you do need to have reserves. So again, buying a multi means it's going to be a little bit harder for you, a little extra work. But at the end of the day, you're buying a property that you're going to help making your mortgage payments with the rents that you're getting, and down the road when you buy that single family, you've got a property that hopefully is going to give you some positive cash flow and be a great investment for you.
That's great. And actually one of the things I do want to point out that George said and brushed right through, and I think is really important for many of you, is that some of you have had internships and some of you had previous job experience where you've built up 401ks. And I think that from what you said, you can use that as your reserves, which is going to be really helpful.
They take a percentage of the 401k, but yes, you can use that. It's usually 50% because when you have a 401k, you can usually borrow 50% of it.
Correct.
So 50% of it is what they'll give you credit for towards reserves, but that certainly helps. Sometimes that makes a difference between being able to buy a multi and not being able to buy a multi.
Interesting. So in order to actually benefit from doing this chain instead, from going from a multifamily to a single family, how long do you need to be in the multifamily before jumping into a single family? I know we had spoken to that.
Right.
I think that's interesting for them as well.
Right. That's the other part of it. People will sometimes think that they're going to buy a multifamily and now they have to stay there for years. That's not the case. FHA's rule is that you only have to live in the property for 12 months. Mm-hmm. After 12 months, if you want to move out and claim and rent that property out, you can. And so really the rule is only 12 months that you have to live in the property.
All right. And so another conversation that we had started that we thought would be interesting for them was that whole idea of streamlining. Can you explain that to the viewers as well?
Sure. So again, another advantage. So back in 2006 and 7 and 2005 and 8, whatever, all of that period of time, mm-hmm. There was a lot of no money down programs where people were getting into a property with no money down. The problem was down the road when the values went down, they weren't able to refinance. FHA has a streamlined refinance program, which basically says that as long as your credit's good, you've been making your mortgage payments on time, you still need to have some reserves in the bank, but as long as all you're trying to do is lower your mortgage payment, mm-hmm. They don't require an appraisal. It's an automatic approval. They verify that you work, but they don't ask you what you make. So basically, they're making it easier for you to refinance if all you're trying to do is lower your mortgage payments, which is fantastic. And that was something that other mortgage programs didn't provide and that caused big problems back in the day.
That's great. So that's a lot of really good information to at least get people started on the ball with getting the understanding of what it takes to own a multifamily up front. And then, like I said before, that there are going to be other videos coming out in regards to how to be a landlord. But we're not going to jump into that right now. What I want to go into now is you've probably inspired some people out there to say, yeah, I'd rather go with a multifamily, but what does it mean to me when I do decide to go for a single family?
Good question, because that once you own the multi, now what you want to do is, at least for the short term, especially if you know within the next year or two you want to buy a single family home, that's your goal. Make sure that when you do your tax returns that you show all your rents, that you don't go crazy on expenses in the property. Now granted, everyone has expenses on the property, but don't overdo it. Don't make the bank think that this 3-family is actually losing you so much money that we're now going to add that as an extra debt to you. You want to show enough rents, enough, and again, it's only 2 rents, so it's okay to show a loss, but just don't go overboard, because now when you go to move out, we know you got that extra rent from the unit you're moving out to, so we know that property is going to pay for itself, and now that property doesn't hurt you. It's an asset, it's paying for itself, and now you can buy that single family home based on what you make, and that multi is actually not a negative for you, it's a positive.
Great. And one last thing I wanted to ask you before jumping off. We talk about down payment for the multifamily. What kind of down payment are they looking for at that point for the single family? You touched on it earlier, but...
Yeah, no, you can, that's the thing, that's the nice part. So we talked at the beginning, if you buy a single family first and now you buy a multi, you need 25% down. But if you buy the multi first and now you want to buy a single, potentially you could buy with as little as 3% down, 5% down. You don't need a big down payment to buy that single family, which makes it easier. So it's a lot easier than doing it the other way around.
Well, that's a lot of great information. I'm happy that you sat here and shared that with us. Is there anything else that you think that you'd want to say from the top level down else to them?
I think one of the big things to remember is buying a multi is not as easy as buying a single. There's some work involved. You need to save your money. You need to build up some reserves. You need to have decent credit. You don't have to have perfect credit, but have decent credit. Don't go buy a car right before you buy a house. Right? Buy the car after you buy the house. Don't add any unnecessary debt that is going to hurt you from qualifying. So I think that's the best advice is pay your bills on time, make sure your credit's good. If you know you're going to buy a house 6 months from now, a year from now, get your credit checked today. We do it for free all the time. Let's make sure, and then we give you advice. Hey, your credit's okay, but you could do this, this, and this, and it'll be better. So try to put yourself in a situation so that while you're saving that money, you also know the whole procedure that's going to make it easier for you to buy a house.
Awesome. Well, just so that way you guys know, once again, as always, my information's here. George's is going to come up right next, and there's going to be more videos to follow. George, thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you guys the next time.